Hey y'all, I have my first viewer correspondence through email. Someone has sent me a record of an encounter, and what makes this special is this guy grew up in the same city that I grew up in, and where this encounter happened is one of the places that I grew up fishing as a youngster. I think he and I are about the same age. I don't know him, but it sounds like he and I are close to the same age. Here we go. Let's go to his story. He writes, "My family owned a small trailer at a fishing camp at Tunica Cutoff in North Mississippi. My parents have sold the place since then, but while we owned it, my mother would take my brother, my sister, and me there, and we would stay for sometimes 2 or 3 weeks at a time during the summers while my father worked shutdowns at the plant where he was employed. It was always a great way for him to make extra money. Since we never saw him during those times, Mom would take us to the cabin and we would spend a great amount of time there. She had friends there and so did we, so we loved it. Another reason we loved it was because there was so much for kids to do there. There were a lot of woods around the area for us to play in, build forts, play night games like hide and seek. We would catch lightning bugs at night and put them in a jar to light the tent that we would sometimes sleep in the backyard. But my favorite thing about staying at the cabin was fishing. I loved to go fishing. One summer when I was 14 years old, my father gave me a Garcia Ambassador bait casting reel. I thought I was in heaven because now I could fish like my father did. I had wanted one for years and my dad knew it, but he waited to give me one until he knew that I could use it properly. It was no big deal for my brother and I to get in the boat before dawn, head to a place we knew that the fish were biting, and fish there until dark. My mom would pack us lunches and give us 2-gallon jugs of water and send us off for the day. It was a more simple time, and kids did some things that would seem strange now. You might never see 2 teenage boys out fishing alone on a large body of water these days, but we did that a lot in the summers. The weekend after my father gave me that casting rig, we headed to the cabin, and I was going to be on the lake that afternoon if I could swing it. Bad luck, I guess, but we left home late and didn't get to the cabin until after dark. That was okay because we were staying at the cabin for 2 weeks this time, and I had plenty of days to fish. The next morning I woke a few minutes before the sun came up and tried to wake my younger brother, but he would not budge, so I left him and jumped in the boat alone and headed south on the cutoff to a spot known by locals as the Flower Lake Runoff. It was a spot on the south end of the lake where water poured and moved swiftly out of the cutoff into Flower Lake south of Tunica. We were not in high water level at this time, so the water was not running out, but there were fantastic places back in that flooded timber where big bass held up and fed on shad and crawfish running in the shallow water. I could not get there fast enough to throw my first bait at those bass. I approached the tree line and eased the throttle down and slowly moved into the trees. The water went back into the cypress and oaks that line the banks of the lake. I think I had moved maybe 100 yards into the tree line when I could see the bank way off into the trees, so I killed the motor. I flopped the trolling motor off the front of the John boat and grabbed my new bait casting rig, which I had already tied on a 10-inch black plastic worm. I was using big baits to catch big fish. The first cast was flawless, but a little short of the brush pile that I was throwing to. I made some adjustments in the spool tension, cast again, and hit the spot that I wanted. I was dialed in. I spent 2 hours fishing through those trees and picked up 5 fish, I think. None being big, but who cared? I was all alone fishing with my own gear on a perfect June morning. Suddenly, close to the bank, I heard a large splash. It was common to hear those noises in the flooded timber and never see what had made the noises, but this was a big splash, like a tree had fallen over. I fished on. Then another splash from the same area to which I was much closer and could see movement on the bank. I focused in on what it was, and about 40 yards away I saw a huge animal standing upright, covered in black and brown hair. I wasn't afraid because there was plenty of distance between us, so I stood on the bow of the boat perfectly motionless, fishing rod in hand, and watched this thing. It was stooped over in a squatting position, scooping water with its hands and throwing it on its shoulders and back. Every now and then it would look around as if it was checking to see if anything was watching. I know I was in view of this thing because I could see him clearly, but the thing never looked directly at me, even though as he panned the woods, his eyes should have made contact with me. Then it stood up. That is when I got a bit nervous. This thing was really big, not just tall, but it was wide too. I have no idea the dimensions or anything like that. I just know it was big. It walked away from my direction until he was only up to a little above his ankles, and then it laid down in the water and started rolling in the shallow mud. It rolled over and over, caking and covering himself with the gumbo mud that is prevalent in the Mississippi Delta. It is a very thick and smooth mud created by always being wet. It is a clay-type soil that is always soaked with water. If you step too deep into it, you will get stuck. You will lose a loose-fitting shoe or a boot while pulling your leg free. But the animal kept rolling over and over, back and forth in the mud until it was totally covered from its neck to its feet, and then began to walk slowly up onto dry land. Just then, the front of my boat bumped into a cypress knee and made a noise. My boat had been slowly moving the whole time, and I had not noticed because I was watching the animal. It heard the noise and looked directly at me. I had moved a bit closer to the bank while drifting and was closer than I was when I first saw this thing. I held my breath, hoping that if I remained still it would not notice me, as it had not noticed me before. But it saw me and began to emit this low, guttural-type growl. Then it moved into the water coming towards me, but stopped after about 3 large steps and began to stare at me. By this time, I knew I was made, so I reached down and pulled the trolling motor out of the water and immediately went to the back of the boat and started the outboard, clicked it in reverse, and began slowly backing away. The animal just stared at me. His eyes and head followed me as I moved into deeper water. I swung the front end of the boat around and threw the transmission into forward and gave it some gas. I moved out about 50 or 60 yards into the timber and let off the gas. I turned to see if the animal was still there, but I could not see anything through the brush and the leaves that had recently sprouted from the vegetation growing there. I stopped the boat and sat there for maybe 10 minutes looking, and I never saw it again. I headed to another spot to fish and later headed back to the boat ramp earlier than I had planned. I can't say that I was too terribly shook up over the incident, but I was not feeling good about fishing close to the bank in Flower Lake Runout the rest of that summer. Since then, and this has been over 30 years, I have told the story to several people. Some think I'm goofy, and some actually believe me. They even tell me stories of their own, but in different places. Strangely, about 2 years ago, I saw a video of a possible Bigfoot in flooded timber in Tunica County by a guy who was hog hunting and got images of the same type animal digging out the interior of an old dead cypress tree. It looked exactly like the animal I saw all those years ago. I doubt I will ever resolve it in my mind what this thing was. But be assured that whenever I fish those Mississippi River Oxbows, I am always scanning the banks for movement. Guys, I thought that was a great account of an encounter. If you have had any kind of an encounter with a Bigfoot or any other cryptid, email me just like this guy did to dixiecryptid@gmail.com. and let me know what your encounter was so I can get it up on this YouTube channel. Okay, until next time, thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next video.